Hi everybody, just another very short video in this saga that's been going on between myself, Iain Clifford and Dan Neidle. So if you haven't been tuned in to this, it's quite important, and the reason why I'm spending so much time on it is because in 2025, in September 2025, at that stage, we had $600 million of confirmed by the IRS signature credit recoupments, which were being, and there was another about 1.5 billion in progress that had been filed by a professional tax filing ERO, that's an electronic filing officer who's got a license with the IRS to file tax returns for the grantor trusts, which are proxies, perfectly lawfully in line with all my research papers, which you can find at Ecclesia Law. There was some bizarre behaviour going on with the head of our trust fiduciary department, Amy Sanger, from June until September. Now, it's very interesting that during this period, Dan Neidle is pumping out blogs on his social media channels, claiming that what I'm doing is a fraud and therefore, basically people should steer clear of it. Now, if you're heading up the Matrix Freedom trustee department at that time, and you're reading these blogs, of which, of course, are very well easily available anywhere in the world because they're all over the internet, and you're also very concerned about the FCA's entrapment by design. So you're watching closely. If you're Amy Sanger, the head of our fiduciary department, of which we had 36 trustees, each trustee is a trustee for a portfolio of grantor trusts. So you can picture the scene. There's 3,000 grantor trusts. You've got Amy Sanger, who is the head of the department. You've got 36 individual trustees. Each one of them has got a portfolio of grantor trusts that they have signed contracts on. So they're between the Matrix Freedom member, who's the grantor of the trust, and the US trustee. So you've got 36 trustees, you've got 3,000 Matrix Freedom members, you've got Amy Sanger, the head of the trustee department for Matrix Freedom members. You've got an electronic filing officer who's filed 1099 OIDs, having our system has already identified the signature credit. We know which securities it's in. The 1099 OIDs have been filed with the United States Treasury. They've confirmed through what's called wages and tax transcripts that the algorithm, the 810 algorithm that they use, has checked everything out, and they are now waiting for a tax return, which is a form called a 1041, to be filed, and then they're waiting for instructions on where to pay out those recoupments. At the time of the sabotage, which occurred in September, there was 600 million of confirmed wages and tax transfers, and I'm going to show you mine in just a moment. So when Dan Neidle is blogging about Iain Clifford and his 1099 OID scheme is a fraud, and then there's the FCA's entrapment by design case, which is going on for 2 years prior, and Amy Sanger is getting more concerned about this potential conviction of Iain Clifford Stamp in Southwark Crown Court in July of 2025. And of course that's what happens, despite all of the evidence that I submitted, that the FCA had no case, the FCA had no prosecutor, the FCA hadn't served the writs, warrants and demands on any authorised service address. Despite all of those things, despite the fact it had been through a judicial review which had been railroaded, obviously the establishment had their entrapment by design. They had their plan. They were going to try and get me into jail for contempt of the court order. And even in the judgment that came out in July 2025, the end of July, they claim in the judgment, the Judge Baumgartner, claims that I'd spent 350,000, I think it is, of funds that were constrained. which is physically impossible to do because the constraint order froze all my bank accounts. So how could I spend any of the funds? It was just ludicrous. But anyway, Amy Sanger, she's reading Dan Neidle's blogs, and she's also very aware that at the end of July there's a sentence that's handed down by Judge Baumgartner at Southwark Crown Court, which is a 12-month custodial sentence of Iain Clifford Stamp, the birth certificate construct. And of course, I'm in North Cyprus. I already knew that the FCA's plan was entrapment by design. I knew that in June 2023 when the arrest occurred, and I knew that it was just another chapter of a very, very long story that started off in 2008 when I blew the whistle on HBOS, and I knew it was just another episode of trying to destroy a whistleblower. So then what then happens is Amy Sanger files to first of all she steals all the funds that are available in various trust accounts. That's a video for a different day. And then what she does is she convinces all 36 trustees that they should file with the IRS fraud identification reports, which means that they are basically saying to the IRS that these filings, these 1099 OID filings, that they weren't aware of them, that they hadn't been appointed as the trustees of the 3,000 grants or trusts. And therefore, of course, what does the IRS do? It freezes all of the recoupments. So 600 million of recoupments are then frozen because the FCA has received these fraud identity reports. Well, Amy Sanger is now in the court, in the New York court. I'm waiting for the hearing. And the ERO, which is, I call him WK in all my letters and emails, so all the emails that go to Dan Neidle, he's got a license with the IRS to file all the tax returns. He's certainly not going to be filing fraudulent tax returns because he'd lose his license. He'd lose his whole tax filing business if he were to do that. So a fraud identity report has been filed by the ERO, WK, the ERO, to the IRS. An investigation started in and around, I think it was around January time of 2026. All of the trustees have been put on notice that they're under investigation by the IRS for filing bogus fraud identity reports. And what these trustees have also done is that they've used the tax filing license. They managed to hack into the tax filing license software, and they were able to file tax returns for themselves. So if you can picture what's going on here, they've sabotaged 3,000 1099 OID filings. 600 million out of 2 billion had been confirmed by the IRS as all the ticks are in all the right places and they're ready to pay out. But then what they've done is Amy Sanger and Mark Gobrel and Marilyn Prospero and a whole range of others that are all named in the investigation. And they have then used the ERO's filing license to file their own tax returns using the Clifford Protocol because they want to make sure that they get their recoupments while everybody else loses theirs. And that's pretty much what happens. So that's the backstory to it. Now, why do I bother telling you all of this? Well, Dan Neidle then starts stepping up his blogging. He's blogging more and more regularly about Iain Clifford's, the 1099 OID tax filing methodology, which is called the Clifford Protocol, is a fraud. Iain Clifford's a pseudo-law, free man on the land, sovereign citizen, nutter, who doesn't know what he's doing, and now he's a tax fraudster, which is what Neidle has been saying. So if you're Amy Sanger, you have plausible excuse. You think Iain's a fraudster because Dan Neidle's telling you he is. Iain Clifford, the body corporate construct, has got a 12-month conviction. That gives you the excuse to resign and fire in all these fraud identity reports to the IRS. Now, obviously, there's no excuse for stealing the money that was in the various trust accounts, but Amy Sanger thinks she can get away with that because Iain Clifford, if he's convicted in the UK, she thinks that conviction for this entrapment by design is going to get her out of jail, basically, that it's not going to enable me to take her on in the New York courts, which of course is what I'm doing. And there's a whole case going on in New York where her fraud and theft is being put under the microscope, and I predict that she will lose that case very badly. Not only will she lose it, but she might actually face jail for wire fraud, because she's fired off all of these fraud reports which are bogus, they're lies, and that is fraud. That is what they call wire fraud, and she's stolen funds that don't belong to her. That's fraud as well. So she's not in a very good place. Dan Neidle, and I want to set the record straight with Dan Neidle. So through Ecclesia Law, and as you know, and I've said many times, I write all of the technical papers for Ecclesia Law, and they are a sort of independent Wyoming company that's been set up as an attorney-in-fact firm, practice as an attorney-in-fact law firm. It's very clear. It says it on the website. It says that I am providing my technical knowledge to Ecclesia Law. So Ecclesia Law then engages with Dan Neidle to try and set the record straight, to try and provide the evidence to Dan Neidle that for him to withdraw his blogs from the internet. That's how it started. I wanted to get Dan Neidle's blogs removed from the internet. So a dialogue starts off about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and there must have been 20 to 30 different email exchanges since then. So Dan Neidle goes from, he wants verification that Ecclesia Law has got the mandate, that he doesn't know who they are. That's his first excuse. That's all proved to him. In fact, it's proved on this email as well, that they are acting for Iain Clifford as an attorney in fact. So when he gets over that excuse, which he won't recognise who they are, they're not a law firm, it's got a bar licence so he wouldn't recognise them, etc. But they're perfectly bona fide to practice under attorney in fact mandates, as was explained to Dan Neidle. So it goes on, and the emails go backwards and forwards, and then he seems to get over that, and now he's seeking proof of the recoupments, because of course, if you're going to withdraw your articles that say it's all fraud, you need the proof. That's his position. So I sent him this, and I'm going to take you into the wages and tax transcript which I sent to him, and here we go. So this is Iain Clifford's, this is a 1099 OID, this is the 98 series, and if we look through here, this is for Iain Clifford, this is the trust set up for Iain Clifford, so this is a grantor trust, 1099 OID filing, and here is the amount, this is the what's called the original issue discount, this is the gross amount, and then when we look through we'll find that the amount of the recoupment, which is down here, $4.477 million of confirmed. This is an IRS, they send faxes out. This is a fax in 2025, in July 25, as you can see, 7.7 million and discounted back to 4.477 million. So that's the amount of recoupment which I was expecting to receive in the Iain Clifford Trust, as it says here. This is from the IRS at 8:33 on the 24th of the 7th, 2025. So Dan Neidle therefore had that evidence sent to him, and in addition to that evidence, he had because he started to doubt that Iain Clifford stamp, because he kept writing emails addressing Iain Clifford stamp when he knew that I had changed the name by depot. Here's the depot. I'm not going to open it. You can see Iain Clifford depot, Iain Clifford depot. And then here is the consent for Ecclesia Law to operate as an attorney in fact law firm for Iain Clifford. So this was all proven to Dan Neidle on I think it is the 16th of March, Monday the 16th of March. And quite interestingly then, there's a lot of more email traffic's going backwards and forwards. He basically doesn't believe it. He wants to know what underlying securities was this 4.4 million confirmed by the IRS recoupment. Dan Neidle then wants to know all the underlying securities. He wants to see the 1099 OID forms which are proprietary and they're private, and we're not prepared to show that to Dan Neidle. And then something very interesting happens. 3 days later, I decide to send Dan Neidle this, which is the 16 years of history of the persecution of me as a whistleblower. The whole story here, which I published on the channel here. And this goes through, there's lots of very powerful figureheads in here. People like Andrew Bailey, the head of the Bank of England. People like Tom Spender, the head of legal of Lloyds Bank. There's MPs like George Hollingbury, Theresa May. There is various sort of high-profile people that are all weaved into this 16-year story that has destroyed my life in terms of my reputation, my professional career, my wealth, my marriage, all sorts of other consequences, 7 ventures, persecution, trying to jail me twice, all of those things because I'm a whistleblower. It's all in this document. Now, the interesting thing to me is that this document is served on Dan Neidle here on the 19th of March 2026, and here's what then happens is over the next couple of days, Dan Neidle starts threatening that if he can't get every other tax weight, if he can't get evidence of the $600 million, which means that, and that would all be private, because that is private between the trust and the trustee and the ERO, the tax filing license holder, who's not prepared to give Dan Neidle private proprietary information that belongs to other people. It would be a federal crime, because you can't hand over private information without the authority of all of the 3,000 grantors of the trust, which of course they're not going to give their personal details to Dan Neidle. I mean, this guy appears to have no integrity or honour. He would have come to me before he started writing his blogs, calling me a tax fraudster, a pseudo-law, free man on the land nutter. He didn't do that, did he? Because he was given a mandate from the establishment to further undermine my reputation. So it's very interesting that since the 19th of March, and we're only a few days on from then, we're only now, a couple of days on from there, that Dan Neidle is now blocking all the email accounts. So it's very revealing to me, just to summarise it. Dan Neidle's been given a job by the establishment, undermine Iain. There's a 2-year gap between the arrest in 2023, June, and the sentence in July 2025. That's all entrapment by design. That case is in the Court of Appeal. They know it's in the Court of Appeal. The establishment, they know that I've got them, if you're a chess player, in check. They've got no prosecutor. They've got no evidence. They've got no service. So if you don't have any of those three, what case have you got? So they know they're in a great deal of difficulty with that case. So whilst they're rolling out their propaganda campaign, which they're doing through Dan Neidle, they're trying to put me in jail. I've evaded that by going to North Cyprus, which is a very deliberate decision I made, because I knew that there is no cooperation and extradition, certainly not for a civil constraint order. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'm not a drug dealer, or I'm not involved in racketeering or anything like that. So there's no cooperation between the North Cyprus government and the British government for extradition for a contempt of, for breaching an order which was null and void to begin with. And it's in the Court of Appeal. So that what they're doing is they're trying to put more and more propaganda out through Dan Neidle, and that's why he was doing his blogs. But what he doesn't realise, and he does what he does now, but when he was putting his blogs out, he didn't realise the consequences of his actions. So I'll leave you on these 2 points. Dan Neidle's blogs led to Amy Sanger and 36 trustees filing with the IRS fraud identity reports, claiming that they knew nothing about the 1099 OID filings because they were trying to extract themselves from what Amy Sanger had told them was a fraud, because she and the trustees were reading Dan Neidle's blogs. Now that in the law is called vicarious liability, because he's used propaganda which has affected 600 million of confirmed recoupments and another 1.5 billion or thereabouts which were in progress for 3,000 Matrix Freedom members who'd had their wages and tax transcripts confirmed to them on their administration platform. So it's not a fantasy. There's hundreds of members that have got their wages and tax transcripts, similar to what I've just showed you. On the Mel Clark at the Settle podcast, she had a wages and tax transcript. She has confirmed that on her channel. So it's not like it's only Iain Clifford who got a wages and tax transcript. There are hundreds of others. And Dan Neidle is vicariously liable because he caused the destruction of those recoupments. And then in the other problem that he's got is that he has tortuously interfered with all of those contracts. There are 3,000 contracts between the grantors and the trustees, and between all of those trusts and WK, the tax filing ERO license holder, and the Old Souls Nation, which is a foundation I've set up to advance as a sovereign nation to bring out to make all of its own infrastructure available for the envoys of the Republic of Old Souls. That funding would have come from a share, to fund all of that operation would have come from a share of the recoupment. So the Old Souls Nation has a case against Dan Neidle for 20% of 600 million, $120 million, because Dan Neidle via vicarious and tortious interference, for which he is allegedly a lawyer, and he should understand what those two things mean. He's responsible for that because of his blogs. Leave you with that thought.